Imagine living your whole life, knowing your children and grandchildren would likely live exactly as you did, poor, struggling for the basics, their world barely changing from yours. That wasn't science fiction. That was human reality for 99% of our species' history on this planet. 300,000 years of near stagnation. Then, just 200 years ago, everything changed. We unleashed economic growth, a force that lifted billions out of abject poverty, doubled lifespans, spread education, built cities of marvel. It was, in many ways, a miracle, but now, look around. A planet grappling with climate crisis, societies fractured by soaring inequality, the looming specter of automation, threatening jobs, communities feeling left behind. Did we unleash a miracle, or did we ride a tiger we can no longer control? Today on CEO's Library, we dive deep into a book that confronts this profound question head-on. Daniel Susskind's powerful work, Growth, A Reckoning. Welcome to CEO's Library, the 1% bookshelf. I'm your guide to the ideas shaping our world. In this episode, we'll journey through the mysterious origins of economic growth, uncovering why humanity was stuck for so long and what finally broke the spell. We'll explore how measuring growth, specifically gross domestic product, or GDP, became a global obsession, almost by accident, and examine the incredible prosperity it gifted us. But we won't shy away from the other side of the coin, the steep, often hidden, price we're now paying for that relentless pursuit. Most importantly, we'll unpack Susskind's provocative and ultimately hopeful argument. The solution isn't simply more growth, nor is it less growth. We need different growth. And crucially, he argues, we actually have the power to steer it in a better direction. Stay tuned to discover how you, as a leader, an innovator, or simply a concerned citizen, can navigate this complex future. Let's start at the beginning, which, paradoxically, is almost all of human history. Why were our ancestors stuck for millennia? Think about it. Someone living 10,000 years ago as a hunter-gatherer and a peasant farmer living just 300 years ago in 18th century Europe, their material living standards were remarkably similar. Grinding poverty, short lifespans, vulnerability to famine and disease. That was the norm. What classical economists like Thomas Malthus famously described was a trap. Any temporary increase in resources was quickly swallowed up by population growth, pushing living standards back down to subsistence level. It seemed an iron law. So, what finally broke this Malthusian trap? Was it simply the invention of the steam engine, the rise of factories, the accumulation of big piles of capital? Well, that's part of the story, but Susskind, drawing on decades of economic thinking, argues it's not the whole picture, or even the most important part. Early economic models focused heavily on capital accumulation, just building more machines, more factories. But history showed this wasn't enough. Think about the Soviet Union. They poured massive resources into capital investment, but growth eventually sputtered. What was missing? The real engine, the secret sauce that truly ignited modern growth. Susskind emphasizes wasn't just stuff, it was ideas. This draws heavily on the work of economists like Paul Romer, who won a Nobel Prize for his insights. Ideas are fundamentally different from physical resources. An idea, a new recipe, a better way of organizing production, a scientific discovery is what economists call non-rival. If I use a hammer, you can't use it at the same time. But if I use a brilliant new algorithm or a better farming technique, you can use it too, without diminishing its value to me. In fact, ideas often become more valuable the more people use and build upon them. They are cumulative. Isaac Newton famously said he stood on the shoulders of giants Innovation works the same way. New ideas build on old ones, creating an exponential potential that physical resources, subject to diminishing returns, simply don't have. But it wasn't just the potential for ideas. Economic historian Joel Mokyr talks about the Industrial Enlightenment, a crucial cultural shift, particularly in Europe around the 18th century. It wasn't just about abstract philosophical thought. It was about a growing belief in progress and a deliberate focus on generating useful knowledge that could be applied to solve practical problems, improve techniques, and ultimately make life better. It was about developing better recipes for using the ingredients, the resources, the labor, the capital that we already had. This combination, the unique nature of ideas and a culture focused on generating and applying them, is what truly overcame scarcity and broke the millennia-long chains of stagnation. So what's the application here for you as a leader? It's profound. True, sustainable value creation in your organization, the kind that leads to lasting competitive advantage, isn't just about allocating more budget to existing processes or buying more equipment. It's about cultivating an environment, a culture that actively generates, shares, refines, and applies new ideas. Are you truly measuring and rewarding the generation of novel solutions? Are you breaking down silos so ideas can cross-pollinate? Are you thinking beyond your physical assets and inventory reports to understand and nurture your company's unique recipe book, its processes, its know-how, its intellectual capital? That's where the exponential power lies, just as it did for humanity 2 centuries ago. Now fast forward. Humanity escapes the Malthusian trap. Growth takes off, industries boom, societies transform. But how did we come to measure success, national progress, almost entirely by one single metric, gross domestic product, or GDP? Imagine you're trying to mobilize an entire economy for a life or death struggle like World War II, as John Maynard Keynes was tasked with in Britain. Or imagine you're locked in a high-stakes ideological and economic battle like the Cold War, trying to demonstrate the superiority of your system over the Soviets. You need a number. You need a way to quantify the total economic output. How big is our economy? How fast is it growing compared to theirs? This is where GDP enters the stage. Initially developed as a tool for wartime planning and mobilization, it provided a single, seemingly objective measure of a nation's total economic activity. After the war, facing the specter of the Great Depression and mass unemployment, policymakers embraced GDP growth as the key indicator of economic health and the primary goal of economic policy. If GDP was growing, it usually meant unemployment was falling, incomes were rising, and politicians could claim success. Then came the Cold War, a period Susskind notes was marked by intense growthmanship, where the US and USSR constantly compared GDP figures as a proxy for national power and systemic virtue. GDP became king not just because it was useful for specific historical moments, but because the underlying phenomenon it measured, economic growth, delivered spectacularly on its promise for much of the 20th century. Why did this single number become so seductive, the mantra of politicians, economists, and business leaders worldwide? Because for decades, growth worked. The tangible benefits were undeniable and extraordinary. Susskind meticulously documents this. Think about the dramatic plunge in extreme poverty globally, lifting hundreds of millions, even billions, out of conditions our ancestors would have found entirely familiar. Consider the massive improvements in health, longer lifespans, reduced child mortality, cures for diseases that once ravaged populations. Look at the expansion of education, literacy rates soaring across the globe. And while the relationship is complex, studies generally show a correlation between national income growth and subjective well-being or happiness, especially when moving from low to middle income levels. This so-called Easterlin paradox has nuances, but the broad link, particularly in escaping poverty, holds. Growth seemed to be the magic elixir. It also held immense political appeal. Why? Because a growing economy, the idea of a rising tide lifting all boats, seemed to offer a way to improve people's lives and solve social problems without having to make difficult, painful political choices about redistribution or fundamental societal changes. Growth became the path of least resistance, the universally accepted goal. The lesson for leaders here is potent. Metrics shape behavior. The story of GDP's rise demonstrates just how powerful a single quantifiable target can be in focusing attention and driving action across entire societies for good and, as we'll see, sometimes for ill. So the critical question for you is, what are your organization's GDP equivalents? What are the key performance indicators, the metrics on your dashboards that everyone is chasing? Do they truly capture the holistic value you aim to create for your customers, your employees, your community, the environment? Or, like GDP, do they inadvertently mask hidden costs, simplify complex realities, and perhaps lead you to optimize for one dimension while neglecting others that are just as vital in the long run? What gets measured gets managed, yes, but are you measuring what truly matters? Because now we arrive at the reckoning. The dashboards glow green with GDP growth. Stock markets reach new heights. Technological marvels emerge daily, but step outside the boardroom, look beyond the spreadsheets. The environment groans under the weight of our consumption, climate change, biodiversity loss, resource depletion, inequality, both within and between countries, has surged, tearing at social cohesion. Workers stare nervously at the advance of automation, wondering if their skills, their very livelihoods, will become obsolete. Globalization, while creating wealth, has often hollowed out communities, leaving many feeling disconnected and left behind. Even our political systems seem strained, sometimes undermined by the very technologies driving growth. What is the real price of the progress we've celebrated? Have we been so focused on the number going up that we've ignored the mounting bill? Susskind dedicates a significant portion of the book to meticulously counting these costs. Crucially, he argues these aren't just unfortunate side effects, they are often deeply intertwined with the specific character of the growth we have pursued. For instance, our reliance on fossil fuels made growth dirty. Technological progress has often been skill-biased, favoring highly educated workers and replacing routine manual and cognitive labor, thus exacerbating inequality. Models of globalization prioritized economic efficiency over place-based stability, disrupting communities. This brings us face to face with what Susskind calls the central growth dilemma. On one hand, the promise of growth is undeniable. Its historical record in alleviating suffering and improving lives is staggering. Giving up on growth means potentially condemning billions to hardship and stagnation. On the other hand, the price of continuing growth as we currently know it is becoming unbearable, threatening our planet and social fabric. We seem trapped. As Samuel Beckett wrote, "I can't go on, I'll go on." Susskind puts it starkly, we cannot go on. And yet we must. So, what do we do? Susskind examines the mainstream proposals and finds them wanting. One approach is what he calls GDP minimalism, trying to fix GDP by adding adjustments for environmental damage or inequality, creating greener or better GDP metrics. While potentially useful for accounting, Susskind argues this misses the fundamental point. The problem isn't just measurement, it's a deeper moral and political challenge about what we value. Tweaking the metric doesn't solve the underlying alignment problem. How do we align the direction of growth with our broader human values. The other dominant alternative, particularly in some environmentalist circles, is degrowth, the idea that we need to deliberately shrink our economies, drastically reduce consumption, and abandon the pursuit of growth altogether. Susskind critiques this approach sharply. He argues it's overly simplistic, often ignoring the profound benefits growth has delivered and could still deliver, especially for the world's poor. It lacks imagination about the possibility of different, better forms of growth. Furthermore, he deems it politically toxic and likely impossible to implement democratically, potentially leading to economic catastrophe and immense suffering if attempted radically. The implication for leaders: stop externalizing costs, both literally and mentally. It's time for a growth reckoning, not just at the national level, but within your own organizations. What are the real environmental, social, and human impacts of your specific growth model? Are you looking at the full ledger, or just the top-line revenue growth? Are you passively accepting the default trajectory of technology, perhaps adopting automation solely based on cost-cutting potential, without considering the impact on your workforce or the potential for human-augmenting alternatives? Ignoring this dilemma, pretending the trade-offs don't exist, isn't a viable strategy anymore. It's simply accumulating hidden risk that will eventually come due. The challenge now is to move from passively benefiting from growth to actively shaping its future direction. And this leads us to the core of Susskind's proposed solution, the path beyond the dilemma. Think about the incredible focused effort that led to the development of COVID vaccines in record time, or consider the astonishing policy-driven plunge in the cost of solar power generation over the last couple of decades. These weren't accidents, they were the result of conscious decisions, targeted investment, specific incentives, and clear goals. They demonstrate unequivocally that we can channel the power of human ingenuity and innovation towards specific desirable outcomes. So the question becomes, how do we apply that same focused power to solve the growth dilemma? How do we steer growth towards solving problems like climate change and inequality rather than exacerbating them? Susskind's answer lies in the concept of directed technological change. Drawing on work by economists like Darren Acemoglu and others, the idea is simple yet profound. The direction of technological progress isn't predetermined. It responds to incentives. Where are the profits to be made? Where is the government funding flowing? What kinds of innovation does regulation encourage or discourage? What societal norms value certain types of progress over others? By consciously shaping these incentives, we can influence what kind of technologies get developed and adopted. What are the tools for directing change? Susskind outlines several. First, taxes and subsidies. Think carbon taxes to make dirty energy more expensive, pushing innovation towards clean alternatives. Consider subsidies for research into renewable energy storage or sustainable agriculture. Susskind even cautiously explores ideas like a robot tax. If automation proceeds in ways that massively displace labor without sufficient compensatory mechanisms, perhaps using the revenue to fund retraining or universal basic income. The point isn't the specific tax, but the principle of using fiscal tools to steer technological deployment. Second, regulation. This isn't just about stopping bad things, it's about setting standards that encourage good things. He advocates for smarter intellectual property rights, perhaps wiser, leaner, and simpler, ensuring they genuinely incentivize useful innovation without unduly hindering competition or access. Think about setting energy efficiency standards for appliances or emissions standards for vehicles. Third, norms and public discourse. What kind of innovation do we celebrate? What problems do we prioritize? Shifting the focus in fields like artificial intelligence, for instance, from merely achieving human parity, machines doing what humans do, towards developing technologies that complement human skills and augment our capabilities, could fundamentally change the impact of AI on the workforce. The goal of directed technological change isn't necessarily to slow growth down across the board, but to change its character. It's about actively trying to weaken the painful trade-offs we currently face. Can we achieve green growth, decoupling economic progress from environmental destruction? Can we foster good automation that works alongside humans, enhancing productivity without causing mass unemployment? Directed change offers a pathway to make these possibilities more likely. However, Susskind is realistic. Even with directed change, some trade-offs will likely remain. We might not be able to have maximum possible growth and perfect environmental protection and absolute equality and complete community stability all at the same time. This forces us to confront the trade-offs explicitly. Susskind outlines 3 broad strategies for dealing with them. 1. Avoid the trade-off where possible. Sometimes there are win-win solutions, Pareto improvements where we can make things better on one dimension without worsening another. These are great, but often rare for the big dilemmas. 2. Weaken the trade-off. This is the primary goal of directed technological change. Make the choice less stark. Make clean energy cheaper than dirty energy. Develop AI that enhances human jobs rather than just replaces them. 3. Accept the trade-off. Sometimes weakening isn't enough, and we must make a conscious choice. Do we sacrifice some potential GDP growth to protect a critical ecosystem? Do we accept slower productivity gains to maintain greater social cohesion or employment stability? These are not technical questions solvable by economists alone. They are fundamentally moral and political questions about our values. This might involve what Susskind terms weak degrowth, not shrinking the economy overall, but consciously deciding to demote GDP growth from its position as the sole, ultimate priority, allowing other values to take precedence in specific situations. So what does this mean for you as a leader? You have more agency than you might think. First, audit your own incentives. What kind of technological choices does your R&D budget, your procurement strategy, your internal performance metrics actually encourage? Are you inadvertently incentivizing growth at any environmental or social cost? Or are you actively seeking out and investing in technologies and processes that align with a more sustainable, equitable model of growth? Second, advocate. Use your influence individually or collectively through industry associations to push for public policies that help redirect innovation systemically. This could mean supporting smarter carbon pricing, advocating for R&D funding for good tech, like human complementing AI or sustainable materials, or calling for reforms to intellectual property laws that foster broader benefit. Third, embrace and communicate trade-offs. Be honest, internally and externally, that choices sometimes involve costs. When you prioritize environmental sustainability or workforce well-being, even if it has a short-term impact on conventional financial metrics, articulate why you are making that choice. Making conscious, value-driven decisions about trade-offs is a hallmark of responsible leadership in this new era. So, let's bring it all together. Daniel Susskind's Growth. A Reckoning is not an anti-growth book. It's a profoundly pro-better growth book. We've traced the journey from millennia of stagnation to the explosive, idea-fueled growth that reshaped our world. We've seen how the measurement of growth, GDP, became an almost accidental obsession, delivering immense promise, but also exacting a terrible price: the climate crisis, soaring inequality, social disruption. We recognize the inadequacy of easy answers like simply tweaking GDP metrics or embracing radical degrowth. Suskind's crucial, empowering insight is that we are not passive victims of technological or economic destiny. We can, and indeed we must, actively direct the path of innovation using smart incentives, taxes, subsidies, regulations, norms to create growth that is more aligned with our human values. The goal is to weaken the harsh trade-offs between prosperity and sustainability, between progress and equality, and where trade-offs inevitably remain, the challenge is to confront them openly and honestly, engaging in the difficult moral and political deliberation required to decide what kind of future we truly want to build. This isn't just a task for governments or economists. The challenge for every leader, every innovator, every investor, every citizen is this: how will you, in your sphere of influence, contribute to shaping a growth that serves humanity, not just the abstract economy? And start by asking the hard questions. Start by auditing your own assumptions and incentives. Start by recognizing your agency in directing change. To explore these ideas further, visit ceoslibrary.com. There you'll find the full transcript of this episode, accompanying visuals to help illustrate these concepts, and links to dive deeper into Daniel Susskind's work and related resources. This has been CEO's Library, the 1% bookshelf dedicated to distilling the world's most impactful books to help you build a better future, one crucial idea at a time. Thank you for joining us. Listeners can find the Amazon link to purchase a copy of Growth, A Reckoning by Daniel Susskind in print or audiobook format in the episode description or show notes on our website, ceoslibrary.com.